Hello, everyone. I welcome you to the today's session, and thank you for joining in at such a tough juncture in our lives. And thank you for putting in your time for this particular session. As you know, we are going to delve into the question of larger question of socio-economic impacts of paying living wages, and we are looking to what it takes to build a resilient economy in that context. And the context in which we are going to have this discussion is with regard to the pandemic that we all are facing and the kind of impact it had on business sector, and how collaboratively we can move ahead and look for some of the understanding on this issue, and at the same time delve into some of the solutions that things towards which we can work together to ensure that living wages are respected. What we have with us today is a wide range of speakers, and we have speakers coming from civil society sector, from research background, and from industry itself. So it's a good diversity that we have on board today, and it gives us a good opportunity to kind of delve deeper into this question, and also look towards certain approaches that could be taken while we talk of question of living wages. And as we understand, living wages or wages per se are central to the question of larger development itself. So without taking much time uh, and being there in between the audience and the panelists, I would first come to the structure. So as structure of this discussion, we in the first phase of the discussion, we will be looking at some of the challenges and complexities, and in the second part of the discussion, our panelists will be coming up with certain solutions or the kind of approaches that could be incorporated for ensuring living wages. So, to begin with, what I will be doing, I will be calling in each speaker or panelist, and will give a brief introduction. So, first of all, I would like to invite Ranjana Das from Oxfam India, and to briefly introduce Ranjana is right now leading the private sector engagement work in Oxfam India, and is particularly working at this juncture on responsible supply chain, mainly in tea and sugarcane sectors. That remains as the focus. And if she has worked extensively, particularly with regard to gender, livelihood, and health issues, with the focus on Eastern India domain. So, Ranjana, please, if you can first uh, talking about Oxfam India and the kind of work you have been doing in Indian context. We would like to understand first is in terms of whole conception of the idea of living wages, because as I understand, there's multiple layers of understanding on issue of wages, and also if you can touch upon briefly on tea and sugarcane sector experience, that what has been the impact. Ranjana, I think you're on mute. Or something like this.
From our experience of working in the Assam tea sector and sugar supply chain sector in India, and then just try to just give a conceptual framework that what actually constitutes living wage and why are we talking of living wage at this juncture of time. So coming back to the harsh reality that we all are surviving collectively across globally, and right now in India, most adversely is the COVID pandemic. And the pandemic since last year, while all of us have been impacted, so on and so forth, but the most adverse impact has been on informal workers and the workers who are not protected through any contractual binding or any social protection, and specifically the migrant workers. Now, in Indian context, almost 90% of our labor force or the workforce are informal sector workers. And to give you a sense of data, almost 450 million workers are in informal sector. And last year we have seen, when the COVID had struck, migrants from the bigger cities had to walk back miles to their, source villages and rural sector, because they were either uprooted from their jobs, or their units or industries where they were working had shut down after the lockdown was declared. Now, within this period of time, either a huge, massive part of them have either lost their jobs, and our social protection mechanisms are not so robust enough to cover them during this point of time when they have either lost their wages or their jobs. Coming back to how and it is not that COVID has worsened their situation. The fact is that informal sector workers are always facing an adverse condition in the labor market. So some of the conditions that they always survive are: there are no contractual binding, no registration of workers, the minimum wages are not guaranteed, and I will come in a while that why living wages are all the more important at this point of time. The wages informal workers get are either not within the range of minimum wages, or at a piece rate, or at a daily wage rate, which are violated mostly. There are no social protection that either the employer guarantee them or the state guarantee them. Now, the state protection schemes or the programs are designed in a manner that in Indian context, the migrants are unable to access them also. It either requires a rigorous documentation process or has something what we call a sedentary bias. So now these are being have been always the existing condition under which the informal sector has always been. COVID basically has worsened the situation. Coming back to Assam tea sector or the sugar supply chain sector, where we are intensively working now. Now, Assam tea sector workers, the plantation workers, apparently seems to be protected by Plantation Labor Act. But if you dig a little bit deeper, almost 39 to 40% of plantation workers are temporary workers. They are all without any sort of a contract. And during the COVID last year, when the lockdown was declared, almost there was a loss of wages for 50 to 60 days. And when the plantation reopened, it is only the permanent workers who are covered under the Plantation Labor Act who got back the jobs, not the temporary ones. Now, these are some of the harsh realities. Wages in Assam tea sector, we right now are doing a rigorous study just to understand what could be a probable living wage, because our finding is that the tea sector wages are very, very low at the moment. Even though the counter argument from the industry is that the tea sector are under the Plantation Labor Act provides housing, education, and health, and over and above they pay a minimum wage to them. However, if you dig a bit deeper, the condition of the housing or the education or the health are not up to the mark probably to guarantee a decent life. So that's the reality in the Assam tea sector. In the sugarcane sector, most of you might be knowing that in the Western Indian belt, last to last year, we did a study which is known as human cost of sugar. From the drought-prone western part of the West Indian state of Maharashtra, almost 0.6 million migrant laborers come for the sugarcane cutting. Now, these are all migrant laborers who last year were not guaranteed of a job because of the pandemic, because they were not sure whether they will be able to travel. Now, coming to their wages, now that's a very strange type of reality, that they're paid as a couple. It's called a koala system in the local language, that the husband and wife are considered as a one unit of labor and they are paid as one single labor. So those are the kind of wage practices that right now we have in relation to the sugarcane or the Assam tea sector. And as I have been saying, that minimum wages are mostly not guaranteed in the case of informal sector workers. Now, why in that case living wage becomes most important right now? Because mostly, as we say, that during the pandemic there has been a massive loss of job. Now, building it back, most of the informal workers either had survived on the meager savings or have survived on state sponsored food security schemes, which most have not been able to access or have survived on aids provided by NGOs or local volunteers or local community-based organization. Now, for them to come back, and the lockdowns are still continuing in context of India, for the entire economy to revive back, it is going to take time. Now, once they go back to job, for them to earn, to survive, and then to build back another savings to sustain themselves is going to take a long number of years. Now, at this juncture of time, we probably need to go beyond the understanding of minimum wage, which just guarantees sustenance. And in Indian context, maybe at a later half, I'll come what is the definition of minimum wage, which government of India is now giving. But however, having said that, we must bring the conception of living wage on the table. And before I rest my case, I'd like to just read out that what is understood as a concept of living wage as per ILO's conception of this to assure decent work and quality of life. It is an enabling, which is basically a living wage is enabling a meaningful participation in society beyond mere survival. For example, a worker should be able to have recreation, supporting family, and saving for future risks also. And this becomes most important in a pandemic like context, and this should be considered as an income below which there can be a risk of deprivation. A living wage can ensure upward shift of workers' capabilities and freedom. Work-related factors such as toilet, space for relaxation, health, working environment, which promote the well-being of workers, are also recognized as a part of living wage. In general, living wage is a wage that enables a worker's that enables a worker to afford a decent standard of living for herself and the family. So what probably is right now important is to going beyond a minimum sustenance wage and to consider a worker's life condition so that he or she is able to not only survive the family but also have a decent a working condition and a life situation. And probably with this pandemic is a context, this is the right time when we start talking about living wage across industries, across formal and informal sector, mostly focusing on informal sector, and across workers who are along the commodity supply chains. I'll rest my case with that, Dheeraj, and probably happy to come back at the later stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranjana. I think it sets a very comprehensive background in terms of what is the conception around living wage question, and what is the basic understanding, at least to set the basic standards of definition as we move into discussion. So next thing I would like to invite Rapatsa, who is right now working as program officer with CSO Coalition with Oxfam in Thailand. And as because we have already kind of looked at the conception of living wage, and Rapatsa has been involved with particularly with conditions in seafood sector, and recently also did a study on the impact of COVID-19 on small scale producers. And based on her own understanding with various civil society groups, fish folk organizations, and frontline organizations in Thailand. So, Rapatsa, can you kind of elaborate on what kind of impact you are seeing in seafood sector, particularly in Thailand?
Thank you so much for the introduction. And I think I will have my presentation on the screen, right? So yeah, I will start now. So my name's Rapatsa Dairat. I'm a program officer at Oxfam in Thailand, and I'm also the coordinator of the Thai CSO Coalition for Ethical and Sustainable Seafood in Thailand, a platform of civil society, frontline, and international NGO that work together. We have like worker right organization member and also artisanal fishery organization in a platform. So today I'd like to talk about the impact of the COVID-19 perspective and experience from Thailand's seafood supply chain. So as I'm talking right now, Thailand facing the third wave of the COVID pandemic. There are now COVID cluster across the country, not only seafood, not only migrant worker or workers, but throughout the country. We found case almost everywhere. So one of the issue, that I would like to focus today is the experience of seafood workers, seafood sector, and how low wages are one of the key sources of worker exposure to risk. The research that we did, during the pandemic confirmed that people are not earning enough, far from enough, even like before COVID. And when the COVID come, it make the situation getting worse for the people. By not earning enough, mean that they are so vulnerable to the risk. And then when COVID come, it hit them the hardest. And yeah, I hope that, in the second round, we could discuss on ways to go forward. Yes, so okay, so back in April 2020, last year, when I and my co-author, we wrote this paper, Thailand received the first wave of the COVID-19 in the country. So we did this rapid assessment. So we identified the key risky areas of the situation. We talk about, we talked to some of the leading seafood companies in Thailand regarding their worker protection measure, which I will not go into detail now, but what I would like to focus is that, at the time, seafood processing industry has not been, affected so badly. So large factory tend to have like business as usual with strict measure. Workers said that, yet they have been required to wear masks, protecting themselves, but for the work, it's not that change, to their life for the first wave. So, however, in this paper, we identify the risk that, if one person got infected to the COVID-19, it will be very, very hard to control the disease because migrant workers they live in a very close quarter. So proper management is much needed, including available protecting gear, social distancing measure in the factory or in the community, and also like a company HR support to access the state benefit is much needed. So this paper was, last April last year. So yeah, and 4 or 5 months later, in mid-December last year, the risk become real, so real. So right before Christmas, the risk, that we have anticipated, happen in the seafood capital city of Thailand, the hub of seafood processing. So yeah, that just one case happened, and then the number keep, rising, and most of them are among migrant workers. So for this second wave of Thailand, we call Samut Sakhon cluster or seafood cluster because it's happened there with like 400,000 of migrant workers living there in the province, and most of them come from the neighboring country of Thailand. So yeah, that is what happened in December last year. And next slide. Yes. So we see the growing, cluster in the case. When it happened, the market and the migrant worker dormitory are under lockdown with fence and barbed wire, and you see guard with security officer. Tens of thousands, people has been, tested. The province has been locked down, and worker has been ordered to stay home. The outbreak, in this seafood hub spread to more than 50 province across the nation. And not only Thailand during that time, in other Southeast Asia countries, for example, Singapore or Malaysia, also report the 1,000 cases among migrant workers as well. So yeah, in the region, migrant workers contribute significantly to various industry, and Thailand seafood industry is one of the example. So to understand this situation, we did Oxfam and the CSO coalition. We did like a interview, in-depth interview to the migrant worker during lockdown to understand the impact of COVID-19 on their life, on their right, and well-being. And I will show you one of the case. So Mia is one of the 20 cases that we have like in-depth interview during the lockdown. She is 55 years old, works from Man State, Myanmar. She worked in the fish cutting factory in the province. She described her work that, she take the fish and cut them and passes on. She doesn't know where it goes. And the pay is calculated to the fish weight. So if the fish is small, she can earn about 100 baht, which is $3 a day, because that she described it as time-consuming process. If the fish is big, she can earn up to like 200 baht, which is $6 a day. So this is before COVID. She has no day off, no leave day, no sick day, sick leave day. When she gets sick, she has to stop working, which is mean that she get no money. She also tell us that during the outbreak, she has been asked to stop working over a month without knowing when she would be able to return to work again. It was difficult for her and her family. She does not have enough money for the daily expense. During the COVID, she only eat rice because she cannot afford to buy meat or some meal. She had vegetable. She said that she does not need any help. She just want a job. With the job, she can afford to live, and support the family and herself. So since the second wave of the COVID that hit the migrant worker like Mia, she said that at the end, she got like 1 month without job, and then she has been called to work after New Year, and yeah. And she said that if it happened again, she could not survive it. Now, like she has no saving at all. She has like 1,000 baht or 2,000 baht left, which means 30 to 40 USD for the whole household. So she could not, face with the pandemic again, for example. This is one case that we have found. So, but it's not only Mia that, face similar this issue. All of the case that we have interviewed we found the similar trend that we found in the interview. Low wages, job insecurity are the common answers. So I will show you some of the common answer here. First one is that there has been asked to stop working, temporarily furlough, because the factory is closed, lock down the province, it's not business as usual. So there has been asked to do the furlough without compensation. And also some worker experience reduced working hours. Working less means less money. Or some worker experience both. For example, there has been asked for furlough, and then when they are called back to work, it's less working hours that factory can offer because there is less job. And last one is that, like during the outbreak, employer asks the employees to do the quarantine. Some get the support in terms of money or rice or food, but some are not getting any support. So the key issue we have found here from the experience of Thailand seafood during the lockdown that I would like to focus today is on the waste system, employment, contracting issue, and functioning mechanism to really support worker that fill the gap in the industry, especially in the pre-processing, like smaller factories, shrimp farm, shrimp pier, for example. But for the seafood processing factory, the big one, we also see the gap as well. And yeah, that would be, the need to be really discussed and fill the gap soon. I will end this now to, this round to really lay the impact and what we have found in the case of seafood in Thailand.
Thanks, Pacha. Thanks for bringing in some of the direct, I will say, voices also or experiences how workers are looking at issues around affordability or access to various provisions. Or so that's helpful in terms of understanding the scenario in the seafood sector. Now, moving further, I would like to invite Kohila from CVDEP India, and she's involved as project coordinator and has extensive experience of working with migrant and construction and informal sector workers largely, and uh, two sectors where she has been working advocating for rights of workers are leather and electronic industry. So, Koila, I think building further on this discussion where we have looked at the conception and how it is playing out in sugarcane, tea, and seafood sector. Can you elaborate on how what is the impact on leather industry particularly, and based on your experience, if you can highlight some of the challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Dheeraj. Thank you. So, before I speak about the impact on the leather sector, especially in Ambur leather cluster in Tamil Nadu, I would like to briefly introduce the organization I represent, CIVIDUP India. CIVIDUP India has been working on corporate accountability and workers' rights since the year 2000. We aim to safeguard the rights of workers employed in the global supply chain. CIVIDUP has been active in Ampur in the leather manufacturing hub of South India since 2013. So I will start my presentation with a brief introduction of leather industry in India. The leather industry in India has witnessed massive growth in the last 2 decades, and the Indian leather industry has been the second largest leather producer in the world, and it holds a very prominent place in the Indian economy as well. It is a very labor-intensive industry and employs more than 4 million workers, and of whom women account for 30%. The leather-based tanneries in Ambur, Tamil Nadu employs more than 150,000 workers. So to assess the impact of COVID on leather and footwear manufacturing industry workers in Tamil Nadu, we conducted a study immediately after the first lockdown in Tamil Nadu. So we interviewed around 50 workers, including 22 shoe factory workers, 11 tannery workers, and small job work unit workers. Job work units are informal setups where around 50 to 100 workers, they work, they stitch shoe uppers on piece rate or daily wage rates. So the major findings, the studies reveals that the workers during the lockdown, the workers were not received any wages or salaries, which led to increased poverty and indebtedness among the workers. More than 60% of workers we interviewed did not receive any salaries, and the remaining received a partial amount, half or less than that. Workers informed that they were not paid for the month of March because they had continued to work till the start of lockdown. That lockdown started in March 25. So many workers were not paid for the more than 20 days they worked for the month of March. The leather workers families have witnessed drastic reduction in their household income. Many families income have reduced from from 10,000. They were the income ranges were from 10,000 to 15,000. During the lockdown, that income reduced to 3,000 to 4,000. That is, so they have to manage their day-to-day expenses. They have to spend their small savings they had and took loans for high interest to buy even necessary items like food and pay rent and pay the electricity bills, etc. So another important things the study revealed that the social security is a far cry for the leather workers. Many workers, even permanent workers, were not registered in the employee provident fund scheme. Um, the studies reveal that only 3 workers, whom we interview out of 50 workers, were able to access the special scheme the government permitted to withdraw the money to manage the lockdown. So in that, only 3 were able to access. The rest of them were not. Either they're not registered for the workers, or either they're not aware of the scheme, and due to the complexity in accessing the scheme, many were not able to withdraw their savings. And immediately after the lockdown, the companies started operating in Ambur. That is after mid of May. So once the company started operating, many companies started terminating workers and illegal layoff started. Even many workers, including permanent workers, were forced to give voluntary resignation because the company cited that there were no more orders, so they have to downsize the workforce capacity. But the workers who were terminated and laid off were not given any prior notification before the termination, and many workers, as they were asked to give voluntary resignation, so they were not able to get their final settlements. Apart from that, the COVID has also had a huge impact on workers' health and nutrition, because many workers informed that their eating habits have changed a lot, and the COVID has affected, the less income have affected the workers, and they could not afford to purchase nutritional food such as meat, egg, and fruit. So majority were dependent on the subsidized food grains distributed through the public distribution system. So, but many workers said that they don't feel any health illness during the COVID, but it is also cautioned that there is a lot of stigma among the workers about the COVID, and the workers are hesitant to come out and go for a testing. So the other side, the home workers who are very invisible in the leather supply chain were severely impacted. Then the factory workers. These home workers usually get work through the intermediaries. They don't directly, they don't know who they are stitching the soup uppers. So they home workers, they earn per month around 1,000 to 3,000 per month, depending on the number of shoes they stitch. So during the lockdown, the home workers did not get even single piece to stitch. So there is no, so that means there is no income for them. And the intermediaries, further the intermediaries and the agents also forego the payment. For the workers, they had completed work before the lockdown. So since we all know that the informal workers, the home workers comes under the informal workers. The informal workers, they don't have any social security measures. But however, these home workers were eligible to receive benefits through the Tamil Nadu Unorganized Workers Welfare Board. During the lockdown, the Tamil Nadu state government distributed ₹1,000 as a special allowance to the workers who are registered in the welfare board. But due to non-registration of workers, because many workers are not aware of there is a welfare board, existence of welfare board, and due to the complexity of registering in the board, many workers were not registered. in the board. So majority, more than, I could say, more than 80% workers were not received even the small benefits the workers gave through the government gave through the welfare board. So this is the situation was factories and home workers during the first lockdown in India. But now we feel that in the second wave, the workers' life has been put into a very dangerous situation, because many companies still operates even during the lockdown. So that is the main cause for increasing the COVID cases in India, especially in rural area. Now, if you see the COVID cases trends in India, especially in Tamil Nadu, we could see that there are number of cases increasing, especially in the industrial corridors like Coimbatore, Tirupattur, Vellore. So now we feel, last time it was only it was poverty and indebtedness and then lack of employment. Now it's threat to life. So I would like to conclude here.
Thanks, Kuhila, and also for bringing in aspects of how both the lockdown or both the waves had a differential impact, also how the situation is becoming graver if we look at the current scenario. So now, as we have already looked into deeper into certain sectors, also next I would like to invite Friedel Adams, who is a senior researcher with Student Institute, and Friedel has extensive experience in across sectors, I would say, in terms of understanding issues around living wage, and has been part of research work as well as of initiatives to ensure realization of living wages in sectors ranging from metal for the car, mobile phone industry, agriculture products like palm oil, coffee, and cocoa. So, Fidel, based on your experience with such diverse range of industry, if you can kind of talk about some of the challenges that you see when it comes to the question of living wage, where are the fault lines or what are the challenges that you have been seeing, please?
Well, the first problem was that we needed an overall acceptance in industry that there is a difference between minimum wages in many countries and living wages, not only in industry, but also, for example, in standard setting organizations. A couple of years ago, there was a study on living wages in the Dominican Republic on fair trade certified banana plantations, and they found out that the workers earned only half of a living wage, but it was a minimum wage, a legal minimum wage. So according to fair trade statutes, even to fair trade statutes, you have to pay a minimum wage, but nobody checked if this is really a living wage. So with the anchor methodology and dozens of studies undertaken in different sectors in many different countries, we have a benchmark now to measure in countries is a living wage, is a minimum wage also a living wage. The next point is to convince companies really to adopt it, and this is a difficult process. If you go into the sustainability department of companies, of course, they often tell you, we want to pay a living wage, we want to pay necessary amounts of money for a more ecological agricultural or industrial production. But in the end, we once had, for example, around here in Germany with half a dozen companies from very different sectors, including leather industry with production in India. And in the end, we agreed that within companies, usually the main benchmark is not human rights abuses or living income, not even minimum income. It is what can we do on a market with the fierce competition we have. And if competitors don't do it, there is a problem for many companies to do specific things. I'm deeply involved in the cocoa sector since more than 12 years in West Africa. Just to shift a little bit away from Asia, in West Africa, according to the last study, alone in the two main producing countries of cocoa, in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, more than 1.5 million children work deep poverty of millions of farming families. This is known since more than 20 years, and everybody in the industry agrees that the price is a crucial factor because the farmer, he gets paid for what he sells, and that's his income. Still, if the world market price goes down, companies complain it's not good. It's not good for our sustainability project. It's not good to achieve a living income, but still they do. And during the COVID crisis, many families, they needed, like in India and everywhere else, they perhaps needed even more money to live in a lockdown, sometimes with rising food prices. But what happened was a 3 or 4% decline of chocolate consumption. And when the cocoa price went down. So if you go to the company officials, they know, of course, that this is completely the wrong thing to achieve a living income, or for workers and farmers a living wage, that prices for agricultural products go down even during a COVID crisis. But this is the market. So market pressure is often the limiting factor, even if companies know that they are not paying a living wage, that they are not paying a price for an agricultural product that is decent. Let me give you one other example from a German company in the leather industry. Or we had twice at Südwind, we had discussions with companies. One was in Indonesia and one was in India. They looked for shoes, and as I said, the main thing was price. So in Indonesia, they talked to a company and they promised we pay at least the minimum wage, which is far away from a living wage, but it was a minimum wage. But in the end, they found out that labor-intensive parts of the production were giving out to home workers, to women mostly working at home with support of their children. The company said, well, that's not allowed because we have written down in the contract that this is not allowed. And the Indonesian company said, well, they are offering as a price with which we can't even afford to pay workers with a minimum wage. The same company is in competition with another company which told us the same story about India. They went into a region for shoe production, children's shoe production, with the cheapest production methodology. And when they went there, they found a lot of homework and children working at home. In both cases, officials in the companies, they were shocked, and they said this should never have happened. And my question was, did you calculate a living wage, and did you calculate a price for what you are paying your supplier in India or Indonesia, which allows them, which really only allows them to pay a living wage? And they didn't. They looked for the cheapest choice to buy shoes, like the competitors are doing. And this is something which is striking and all across sectors. And this is also something which is not in line with the UN guiding principles on businesses and human rights, which were decided in 2011 and which say that companies have a human rights due diligence, and paying a living wage, paying a wage where you can feed your family with, is a human right. This is also already written down, the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and in the founding document of the International Labour Organization. You can even find it in our background in the Old Testament, and I'm sure that in India or Thailand and everywhere else in the philosophical and religious literature, you will find hints that a living wage, that feeding your family with your labor, is a human right. And we will come to that later on with the solutions, but a level playing field for a company, knowing that competitors are doing the same, is crucial to achieve living wages and living income globally.
Dheeraj?
Yeah. Thanks, Fidel, and thanks for adding some of the dynamics, I would say, in terms of how market plays role when it comes to ensuring living wages, and how notions of minimum wage or living wage get intertwined when we start looking into defining it, and some of these standards themselves might be exclusionary to be very to in understanding. So moving further, I think we will move to one of the voices from the business sector itself, and we have with us Rachel Alden from Unilever. She's right now working as Global Director Human Rights Stewardship and working across businesses on Unilever's human rights and social impact strategy, and looking at how to address issues related to human rights or some of its root causes. So also she leads on Unilever's human rights public reporting, and previously she had career in UK politics also, including working with Prime Minister's office and heading international relations for the Labour Party. So, Rachel, welcome to the forum, and would be good to understand what kind of impact did this pandemic had on your area of work, if you can elaborate on that.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for our partners at Oxfam for the privilege to be able to be on this panel with you all at such an important event. So from a Unilever perspective, the pandemic in terms of our priorities has been to help and support our employees, our business partners, and of course the communities in which we operate. So this has been doing things such as putting specialist tiered protocols within our factories so that we can protect our workers whilst continuing to run our business, by giving cash flow relief to our most vulnerable suppliers, so our small and medium-sized suppliers, and also helping our small-scale retailers. And also, of course, working with our partners on the ground to deliver 100 million euros worth of products. So that's sanitizer, bleach, food products, and working with partners such as UNICEF to run hand washing and sanitation campaigns to reach a billion people, and a lot of work that we're doing at the moment in countries, including the work done by HUL in India to support the country and going through the tragedy. Of course, in my particular area of work, as you say, what I have seen and how everyone on the panel has said so eloquently is how the pandemic has affected the most vulnerable and marginalized within our society and our communities. And of course, they're the very people who are keeping the economies in our lives going, those workers on the front line, on low wages, in precarious work, the seafarers who are unable to leave their ships and go to shore, and Unilever's also been vocal about that. And as our CEO has said, this social inequality and climate change are the two biggest challenges that we're collectively facing today. And that is the reason why, as Unilever made the commitment in January this year, that everyone who directly provides goods and services to Unilever will earn a living wage or a living income by 2030. So this builds on the commitment that we already pay our direct employees, and this is about working with our suppliers. And I'm very happy to go into this in a little bit more detail in the next round of questions.
Thanks, Rachel. So I think in this first part of the discussion, we have looked at range of voices, I would say, in terms of how civil society or industry or research community or organizations working directly with workers are looking at some of these issues, and some things that come out very clearly that there is an effort that is being put in by some of the businesses, but at the same time we also see that looking at the larger economy or varied sectors, there are issues related to informalization, contractualization, sedentary bias, or already existing fault lines that are already in place, so which have been amplified by the by the pandemic at present, or there have been issues regarding the kind of working condition that workers have, or the kind of affordability to various provisions they are having. So this is the larger, I will say, landscape in which we are working. So in next half, looking at the time also, though we had allocated around 7 minutes, I would like if our speakers can get into in next part of the discussion into some of the solutions, and at the same time, if we can try to limit ourselves to, let's say, 5 minutes, if that's possible, because then maybe we can take a few questions also that would help in building on this discussion. So next, if we can have Ranjana from Oxfam, if you can talk about what kind of approach we can have when we are looking at solution, because we are looking, there are many stakeholders, there are range of issues and fault lines, and there is commitment towards making some effort. So what do you see as an approach, or what kind of stakeholder action can happen in this scenario?
Thanks, Dheeraj. And I think, the solutions right now, the situation is so complex that seeking a solution probably requires a collective action. That's what my first take would be. I mean, while last year the pandemic has been on super peak, there are few things that has been happening which also has an impact on the larger workforce. One, Oxfam last year during September, October had published a report, Pandemic and Profits, where we had actually power profits and the pandemic, where we had actually said that 32 of the world's largest companies stand to see their profits jump by 109 billion more in 2020 as the COVID-19 pandemic lays bare on the economic model that delivers profits for the wealthiest on the back of the poorest. That has been one of the reality, that while the pandemic had an adverse impact, however, businesses, companies did make a huge amount of profit. In Indian context, last year also has been very critical. It is during the pandemic when Government of India, especially the Ministry of Labour and Employment, had actually consolidated 44 labor laws into 4 labor codes. And right now, the 4 labor codes, it's very, very unclear that how are they going to unfold, especially whether they will actually help the informal workers or workers in the supply chain. The code on wages, which is most important in the context of discussion of living wage, last year we did a critique of code on wages and also sent recommendations to Ministry of Labour and Employment. The conception of minimum wages within the code of wages somewhat probably tries to capture the components that I had given earlier in my definition, while I laid out the definition of living wages. That there are components which should not only take care of bare sustenance, but also take care of a housing, of the minimum amount of clothing required, the education requirements, so on and so forth. But if you look into the rules, which are going to be implemented, they were simply unclear how they will unfold, especially in the context of informal workforce, who are varied across sectors, across supply chains, across regions also. And the code on wages were also not very clear that how are they going to unfold for migrant workers, who are especially moving, mainly the cyclical migrant workers who just stays in one place for 3 to 4 months and seasonally move. And in agriculture sector, we do see such kind of migrant workers in huge amount. How these labor codes, especially code on wages, will unfold for them is yet not clear. But having said that, since we are also in a forward-looking discussion, I mean, we have elaborately in the first section said how the pandemic has impacted and has ridden on the informal sector's existing condition. I think it is a time when all the stakeholders have to come together. I mean, Oxfam India right now is facilitating a multi-stakeholder platform where we are inviting brands, companies, civil society organizations, trade unions, workers' representatives to come and sit together and find a way out, that how can we, or can we at all ensure living wages for the workers in the supply chain, or can we at all do a valuation of the social protection and that is required and can be added to the wages paid by the companies or those who are in the supply chain. Now that's the kind of approach, a larger approach, that is required at this juncture, where all of us come together, sit together, bring into table the realities that are impacting the informal workforce, especially those who are located in the commodity supply chain, and for those who we are sitting today and giving a representation. So yes, a collective action right now is required, and probably a multi-stakeholder approach where the company, the private sector, the civil society, the trade unions and workers must come together to find a solution towards ensuring a living wage for a more sustainable and a robust economy to build back better post-pandemic. Thank you, Dheeraj. Yeah.
Thanks, Ranjana, for setting the tone in terms of approach that we can have while looking at solutions uh, on this particular issue. So next, if Rapsa, you can talk about like you have been engaging with various stakeholders, directly with workers also in Thailand. So and various civil society coalitions. So what sense you get in terms of what is the message that you are getting that could be a probable approach, and what are some of the concrete actions that can be taken, if you can please add.
Thank you. So for this particular issue on wage, we think that now more than ever that we would like to advocate for this. Together with the Thai CSO Coalition, almost 5 years that we work together at a platform of frontline CSO, that we do the research, we engage with the industry, we build up the policy recommendation on worker voice, recruitment, health and safety, and then we come together and talk to the industry to find solution together. And I think this will be the same approach that we will do with the wages, that we have the research and we're gonna launch the research like in 3 weeks from now, and we will do the approach that we agree that collective action that need from the stakeholder will be able to really tackle this difficult issue. Because if we focus on the wage in Thailand, Thailand have only daily minimum wage. We don't have the standardized living wage here. So by having only minimum wage daily, it does not guarantee how many days per month you will get. Worker does not have that, in guarantee. So it leaves workers in vulnerable position. If they don't have the guarantee day per month. And if something happens, for example, COVID-19, worker can be called out to work up to less than 10 days a month, and it's not it's not possible to survive, and it's happened in the industry. And so that's why when we found this kind of case, we talk with workers for like CSO. We think that we will collectively advocate for this issue as the first step toward the living wage. We would like to advocate for at least some guarantee income per month that workers should get, because we do not advocate worker to work every day. It's not possible, and nobody should do that. But there have to be some minimum standard to guarantee that what this is the income they will get per month, because worker comes so far from home, and it's not possible like Thai person to work with several employers. If this employer doesn't give me the job, I change to the others. But it's not possible for the migrant worker to do that legally. So that this combination of knowledge from the ground, from the research, this is what we will advocate together at the platform on this issue of wage, that they should get some minimum they guarantee per month. This is the first step toward, living wage, that we would like to have the space to really discuss with stakeholder and do the research and advocate for that in the future. But we cannot wait for that. So this is the first step we will do, to ensure that people can survive in the pandemic and be secure if the next, insecurity, the pandemic come. Thank you.
Thanks, Apacha. If Koila, you can please come in and kind of bring some kind of expectations that you are hearing when you are engaging with workers' right issue, also with larger, I would say, informal and migrant labor sector. You have been doing extensive work. So, as CVDIP, what are some of the key expectations when it comes to ensuring living wages? I think you have to unmute, Koila.
Sorry. CIVIDA was a grassroots organization which directly works with the workers in the supply chains, always request the brands and advocate brands and the retailers to pay living wages, at least not living wages, at least especially during the situation like COVID and the lockdown, at least pay wages to the workers, the hands of workers. So because majority of the workers we spoke to, they didn't receive wages. So in Ambur, the leather factories, workers are paid only the minimum wages. Even the permanent workers who have more than 5 or 15 years of experience are paid just 1,000 rupees or 2,000 rupees higher than the minimum wage, not much. So and the condition of the wages of contract and piece rate workers even less. They paid only 250 per day. That comes around 3,000 to 4,000 per month. In case of home workers, they not even have a minimum wage. So we request to fix at least minimum wage or a decent wage for the workers to manage the COVID kind of situations. So if the workers have living wage, in case what we are discussing today, if we are workers have a living wage, they would have handled the situation way better than the current thing. So the impact would have reduced at least 50 percentage. They be workers able to had an opportunity to save the money, and so with that money they would have eaten well and taken care of the family members during the lockdown, and that would have reduced the workers' mental and physical distress. So apart from the payment of living wage, we also feel that workers, the workers should be provided, all workers should be provided with the social security measures. We come across many workers are not being able to register in the ESI, social security measures such as ESI and PF. So government should ensure that these social security measures, which even though very less, should covers all categories of workers irrespective of their whether they're contract worker or permanent worker. So it should cover all type of workers. So the brands and retailers should also take necessary steps to ensure that the workers in the factories have covered by these schemes. And then freedom of right to association is another important thing. That if you look at the factories in Ambur, there is no presence of trade unions. So often the workers don't get any opportunity to negotiate with the employer on wage and other better working conditions. So the brands and retailers and the companies should come forward and respect the workers' right to freedom of association and willing to have social dialogue with workers and the representatives. The another thing we demand for a better grievance redressal mechanism, because the workers, especially women workers in the factories, they face a number of verbal and abuses at the inside the factory premises by the supervisors, but they don't have any proper grievance redressal mechanism to make complaints. even in some cases, even the many companies, they not even have the sexual harassment committees. See, if we exist, that is only on the paper. So we have to have the better redressal mechanism, and companies should stop illegally terminating workers during the situation like a pandemic like this, COVID lockdown. So many workers are terminated and without any compensation. So that kind of things the company should not follow again. And the companies also follow the COVID safety precautions and safety measures. We hear that many workers were not even given masks, and they were asked to buy masks. So that kind of situation should be should not repeat, and workers should be provided free masks, and the company should establish facilities like hand washing, maintain social distancing. So these are the things we would like to demand to improve the better working condition of the leather workers. And I agree with Nanjana for the living wage. We should, as a workers organization, we should come together and collectively engage with everyone for the better working condition.
Thanks, Koila. Thanks for putting in these very, I will say, very clear recommendations or demands in terms of what could ensure better conditions, largely for workers, I would say. Next, if Friedel, you can come in, and I think based on, because you have been also researching on the aspects related to living wage in various contexts. So if you can come with certain kind of like solution-based approaches that could be taken, or something that you have seen working in your own experience in while engaging with research or bringing these initiatives, and maybe you can also share some examples if that's possible. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, thank you. First of all, of course, what other speakers already mentioned, these multi-stakeholder initiatives, support by government, and so on, are very, very important. I don't want to add here something, because we heard these very good examples. What we are working here on in Germany and in Europe is indeed on a human rights due diligence legislation. Let me tell you an anecdote. 1.5 years ago, I was on research for coffee in Ethiopia. Most coffee farmers are very, very poor, even some of them producing best coffee of the world, but that was one part of the story. The government is now looking to set up industrial parks to attract foreign investments. And in one of these parks, I saw a huge textile factory, and I asked my local consultant there, who's owning it? And he said, well, a company from Bangladesh. So what's happening presently is textile and clothing industry, they moved out of China when China became too expensive, meaning wages were increasing. They moved to Bangladesh. And now after Rana Plaza, you have these discussions about better conditions in Bangladesh, including perhaps a living wage of 150 euros per month, which is nothing compared to wages in Europe. And now even producers from Bangladesh are detecting that in Ethiopia, you have presently wages of $50 per month. So the track is continuing its way to the cheapest location location without even a minimum wage. A few weeks later, I was at a conference here in Europe, and there was a labor minister from India for one of the states, and there was a labor minister from Ethiopia. Both explained that they are calculating living wages, and they want to have a minimum wage, which is covering a living wage. But both were afraid that if other countries don't do it, companies would just move. They would not go to Ethiopia and perhaps go to Madagascar or somewhere else, or in a year or two to Myanmar and so on. So what they said, and is we need a level playing field, coming back to the expression I used before. A company which knows that the competitor is going to the cheapest location will do the same. A company which is under a human rights due diligence legislation, which says you have to adopt procedures to avoid breaching of human rights and paying people a wage where they cannot even feed a family from is breaching human rights. A company which knows that the competitor does not do it would perhaps stay in Bangladesh and look for better conditions there, or would apply to the Ethiopian government by saying, I will come to invest, but only after you have a minimum wage, which is a living wage. And this is why we need all this stakeholder engagement and your feedback about the situation in the producing countries. But we also need, and many companies have a main market in industrialized countries, we need human rights due diligence legislations here. John Ruggie, who invented the principles on businesses and human rights for the UN, he recently stressed that including families, roughly 2 billion people globally are involved in multinational value chains. And if such a legislation would put pressure on these chains and would clearly show your governments that they do not have to compete with the lowest minimum wage, but with decent working conditions, with living wages, with living income, meaning prices for agricultural products, that would be a major step ahead. Yeah, this is what we are looking for. The striking thing here in Germany and in Europe, I'm involved, as I said, in various discussion rounds, is that many companies would support us, and I expect support from Unilever. But at the same time, umbrella organizations of companies are watering down the legislation. We have seen this in the last weeks in Germany, where Parliament decided yesterday to have a watered down human rights due diligence. We are deciding a legislation here in Germany which falls significantly behind human rights due diligence principles by the United Nations. We are doing this in Germany because companies say we have to stay competitive. And they now go to your countries and try to source. So we need the pressure here on the companies. We need the pressure also of companies on their umbrella organizations. And beside all your engagement on the ground, we need governments to decide that human rights include living income and living wages.
Thanks, Fidel, for this very kind of, I will say, it is also looking at the larger political economy within which issues around wage or production function globally, and helps to understand how these decisions are getting influenced. Moving further, I will come to now to Rachel, and Rachel, if you can talk about because as a business, Unilever itself has a commitment to comply with living wages and to ensure that it is followed. And so, because there has also been one question around to understand the kind of motivation or the kind of potential that industry sees while looking at the assurance regarding living wages, that why you think it is important as a business, what motivates Unilever to have this incorporated, and also if you can touch upon some of the other solutions that you think based on your own experience. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think what we're all saying on this panel is, if there was ever a time to really build and deliver a living wage movement, it's now. And I actually find this also a really exciting time, because when I talk to my peer companies and the work that we're doing, there is real movement on this, and there has to be. You know, your question about why is this important to Unilever? Well, you know, we have our Unilever compass, and that's all about doing business with respect for people and protecting the environment. We're a company of purposeful brands, and that's what our consumers expect of us. They don't expect to have poverty wages in our extended supply chain. I'm also often asked by other peer companies, but what's the cost of doing this? It's going to cost a lot of money. And our response is, what's the cost of not doing this? You know, in terms of, you know, corporate reputation and responsibility, as we've said, though also in terms of compliance with the UN guiding principles. And also what we see coming down the track, as mentioned, mandatory human rights due diligence. But it's not just the right thing to do. We strongly believe there's a strong business case to do this as well. It makes sense to put money in the pocket of people, of workers, because particularly those on lower incomes spend that money. It goes back into the economy, and often those workers are buying products such as Unilever products, basic products. So it doesn't make sense to restrict that flow of money within the economy. So that fair value distribution is absolutely critical. So I think, there's an economic sense. There's also, to earlier points, we also recognise that there's also responsibility in terms of purchasing practices. So how a business conducts its business with us, with suppliers, is also absolutely critical. And so we do understand that, and that's discussions that we are having. So there are things that need to happen. So we need to have clear data, as we've talked about. And that's why we're really supportive of the work by IDH, the Sustainable Trade Initiative, in terms of recognising clear data methodologies. So like the anchor methodology that's been mentioned, but also wage indicator, fair wage network and others. We need more data, particularly at the regional level. So there's a real role there also for organisations. But what we want, and need more than anything is that movement to truly create living wage economies and to have that level playing field, which is really important for business, as we've said. I remember Oxfam saying to us that they just want companies to recognise that poverty wages are not acceptable in their extended supply chains. And they understand that we don't have all the answers, and it is going to take some time, and it is quite complicated, but they just want that recognition, as do other stakeholders. And so we recognise that, but we really need others to come with us. So we need governments, to the earlier point, to come with us, not just those within Europe, strong discussions from particularly the German government and the Dutch government. We want governments from the global south as well. We have to have civil society working with us as well to really push and encourage other businesses. And of course, the trade unions are critical. Of course, living wage is a floor. It's not a ceiling. And of course, freedom of association and social dialogue and collective bargaining is absolutely critical in any of these discussions around wages. And we need the institutions like the ILO that has such a key role, and we need the ILO to come together and also really drive this agenda. And the UN Global Compact, where we really see some really good work. We're members of the Decent Work in Global Supply Chains Working Group, and we see real momentum there. And the OECD is critical through Business for Inclusive Growth. So we have these various platforms, we have discussions with businesses. We mustn't forget, of course, that we can't just look at living wage in isolation. So we also have to look at those other human rights. So we have to look at working hours. We have to look at equal pay for equal work. We have to look at freedom of association. But we understand that living wage is an absolute enabler to other rights. So I think it's really important, as I say, that we bring others with us. We need to have the tools so that businesses can also be able to measure and understand the gaps. We have to have government, civil society around the table. We have to have action. So I think I'm delighted by this panel. I'm delighted by the discussion. I call on everyone on the panel and beyond in the audience to really drive this living wage discussion so that we can really build back better and really have the jobs and the employment conditions that we all really want. So very happy to take any further questions, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
Thanks, Rachel. So I will just build on this discussion further also, Rachel, and just to understand, like as a business, what kind of internal and external challenges you face, like while as Unilever when you are going ahead with this commitment. Can you elaborate on some of them? Like,
well, I think there's first of all, there is the understanding of the challenge of understanding, as we've said. So actually that internal capability, so that when we talk about a living wage and a living income, what are we actually talking about? So I think there's that work that needs to be done. There's then, as I say, the tools. So when people understand what a living wage is, then they say, well, what is the living wage for a certain region in a certain country? So that also becomes one of the challenges and some of the differences in the methodologies. But fundamentally, everyone believes that people need to be paid fairly for a fair day's work. And so everyone was very keen to actually do this, but again, as I say, it's the business question. Well, what is the cost? The reality is that it's very difficult to actually work out what the cost is because we don't have the baseline at the moment. So first of all, the work that we need to do is actually just understand our baseline, and I guess it's also the scale of the challenge. We are talking about our direct, what we call our tier 1 suppliers. We have approximately 50,000 tier 1 suppliers. So actually the scale of our commitment and the impact that's going to have on people and their families is huge. But as I say, we don't have the answers. We certainly know that we can't do this alone. Sometimes for a business, when you don't have the answers to something, is a bit more difficult. Companies are a bit more nervous about making that commitment, but we know it's the right thing to do, and it's something that we will do. But we absolutely need to have others coming along with us on the journey, and we see that. So, for example, IDH, as I mentioned before, have launched a living wage call to action, which is specifically aimed at businesses, just to say that we're going to start working on this. We're going to start to understand our gaps. We're going to advocate together. We're going to use common tools. It's about that understanding. And so we say, just putting a flag in the sand and saying, yes, we recognize that. And when you see more companies on the journey, more company commitments, then that movement then grows, because then it becomes an expectation. And that's what we need, an expectation that companies are working on this. And I say, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it clearly is, and it is a requirement, as mentioned, looking at UN guiding principles, but because it makes business sense. It doesn't make business sense to build your business model on poverty wages.
Thanks, Rachel. So now I will move to Friedel, and Friedel, based on, because you talked a lot about the dynamics that plays out while deciding on some of these things. So two things that if you can comment upon. One is, what do you think at employer level or at intermediary level, what is the reason for following or not following issues of following aspects of living wage? And second, if you can also talk about the role that value addition approach can play, like in industry, in terms of ensuring living wages. If you can comment on these two aspects.
Well, I think the discussion about decent price, decent wage, living wage, but it reaches companies is quite new. When I studied economics at a university here in Cologne, we were taught a lot about prices, but nothing about human rights issues or wages. And often there is if I look into companies, there is a strong division between purchasing departments and sustainability departments. And there are two different ways of thinking. One is very, very competitive, and one is oriented at values and decent wage and decent income. Let me there give again an example. I was once in a discussion about should a retailer for its own brands buy certified cocoa a few years ago. In the meantime, we know that buying certified is by far not enough, but at that time it looked like a solution. At that time, a bar of chocolate was sold for 35 cents. And the producer said, well, if you give me 1 cent more per tablet, 1 cent, I can buy certified cocoa, because cocoa is only 6% or something of a bar of chocolate. And the head of sustainability said, well, it's only 1 cent. Where's the problem? the lady responsible for purchasing said, "Are you crazy? That's our profit margin." And I said, "Well, then add 1 cent." And they said, "Are you crazy when we are more expensive than our competitor? We are talking about 1 cent per bar." You could say that everybody can afford it, but the benchmark for the purchasing department was, can we offer it at least at the same price as our competitor, or better, cheaper? And this is a thinking you find often within companies, and there are conflicts within companies, that these two departments are often separated. I know only a few companies who have their sustainability people within the purchasing department. Now, to come back to your question, what's changing? We have a changing environment. We have specifically young people now entering companies who are questioning, what are we doing here? And what are the consequences in the global value chain? We know much more about these consequences nowadays, like in this conference here. 20 years ago, it would have been a very costly event because we would all have to meet in one room. And now we do it by internet, and we know much more about the value chain. And we have a shift of thinking, at least for some people, concerning living wage and living income, because they think now, as it is essential that people can live on it, we need to talk about it. And as a business case for companies, it is a disaster often if they are not paying a living wage or a living income, and a value chain is disrupted because people choose to leave a factory and go to hire somewhere else where they earn more. You lose a lot of knowledge. So paying more and having satisfied workers who stay in your company, who gain more and more knowledge about what they are doing, who improve processes, it can be, or it often is, a business case. It might be a little bit more expensive at the moment, and this is a problem, because if it's more expensive at the moment and you are looking only for the next year, you have to publish your next balance of your company in a few months, and everybody will measure what's your net profit. So you have to look more into long run, and I hope that this is more and more happening because of the pressure we have nowadays from different stakeholders. Partly of this is a philosophical question, but I see that I'm already talking too long. I hope I gave a little bit of an answer. Sorry.
Thanks, Fidel. I know this time is too short to kind of comment on some of these complex realities also. I will now invite Ranjana, if you can please very briefly talk about some approaches that could be adopted for calculating living wages, or what can work, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, see, globally there are a lot of methodologies. Anchor methodology is one very, very famous one. And in Indian context, we have our minimum wages, as I said, code on wages and all. Now, see, more than a methodology, I think the whole principle and the approach is very important. I would like to quote Rachel over here when she says, and I absolutely agree with her, that there should be a human rights approach while we consider even the case of living wage. So number one is that the wage must be set at a point which actually ensures rights, dignity, entitlement, and human rights for a worker who is coming to join either a supply chain or a sector where she or he will be working. That's number one. Number two, it should encompass all the factors or all the indicators that is required to have a dignified life, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's a decent living condition, or whether, as I said from the definition of ILO, that anticipating certain future disaster or any unprecedented incidents. Now, these are some of the indicators which probably would vary regionally, which would probably, have local dimension. Now, these has to be considered when we are calculating living wage, the local market condition, the availability of the essential services, those things needs to be taken account for. And finally, the most important is, while doing this process as a company or from the government, a must is what we used to read when we used to do our economic classes is a collective bargaining and a representation from trade unions or workers' representatives. I think if these all are considered, a certain methodology certainly can be adopted. But the point that I'm trying to make is that now it is a time that we move from a need-based to a principle-based calculation of wages, which for the definition's sake, we are saying living wage. So that should be my take, Dheeraj. Thanks.
Thanks, Ranjana. And as I see, we also are coming to the end of our session in terms of the timings that we have at hand. And it was a very elaborate and I will say a very holistic kind of understanding that we have kind of developed with this, with different kind of voices coming in. And when I hear you all, I kind of message, if I take a attempt at kind of wrapping up, because it's a very difficult thing to do also with such an elaborate discussion, is to what I get in terms of messages, the message of social dialogue, having a collaborative approach, or moving towards a collective action. So that is the basic premise that I get, where we all need to kind of start moving towards. And we have a situation like there is a one another thing that I see, that there is a recognition that there is a problem at hand. So now, because there is a recognition, we can move collaboratively towards a solution in this particular context. And there are layers to it, this collaboration, there are layers to it, moving from larger political economy, looking at collaborative of nations, and looking at a role of producing countries to countries that are buying products, companies who are producing, their intermediaries, their supply chains. Then on the other hand, there's a whole gamut of trade unions, workers' rights organizations, community collectives, collectives of marginal voices. They are standing with all the voices and their demands. And on the other hand, we also, what Fidel was pointing towards, was a new generation of managers or youth who are coming in with a very clear understanding on human rights aspects of business. So I think there's a larger call that I see is towards building a collaborative approach, and also look at some of the global standards that we are having right now in terms of UNGPs, or the kind of role that organizations like OECD or UNGC can play in this particular context. So to not kind of I will say take away the collective voice or the diversity of discussion away, I would say that in the end it should be there should be a collaborative movement with an approach where in the center of the spirit we have workers and marginal voices and smallholders as the center of our understanding, and based on that we can come to certain minimum standards or principles for building this global collaborative. So thanks everyone for your time, and please stay safe. Thanks for your time for joining me for this discussion.
Thanks for inviting.
Thank you. Thank you.